In Guardians of the Galaxy, the Suicide Squad, Peacemaker, and Creature Commandos, James Gunn made us care about some truly awful people, including a narcissistic assassin, a foul-mouthed raccoon who treats his friends like garbage, a robot obsessed with killing, and a gross rat that can't even say a word. We even laughed at the jokes of a monster who kills for fun, and empathized with a spoiled guy who risked the entire universe over a tantrum. But how does James Gunn pull this off? Today in Mr. Headcannon, we're breaking down the 4-step formula James Gunn uses to make us care about terrible individuals. Step 1 is to introduce broken characters with deep trauma and painful backstories. Let's take Peacemaker as an example. When we first meet him in the Suicide Squad, he's a cocky bastard who enjoys hurting innocent people. To top it off, he thinks he's the smartest person in the room, even though he's usually the dumbest. And that's saying a lot, because at the start of the movie, he shares the room with King Shark, who can barely form a coherent sentence.
So smart, me. Enjoy books so much.
Some of Peacemaker's comments might be funny because they're ridiculous, but he's genuinely a terrible person. In the third act, he kills Rick Flag and tries to take out the rest of the team to keep the truth about US interference in Corto Maltese under wraps, because it might damage the US image. We were all cheering when Bloodsport shot him because he freaking deserved it. But then the Peacemaker show came along and showed us why this guy is the way he is. Chris's personality didn't just come out of nowhere. It was inherited from his dad, Augie Smith, a racist, misogynistic man who abused his kids for years. Chris suffered all kinds of abuse, and his dad even blamed him for his brother's death, even though it was clearly Augie's fault. But because it was his dad and not just a random stranger, Chris couldn't see the abuse for what it was. He convinced himself that was normal and developed an awful personality as a shield to avoid feeling like crap, and also because he thought that would make his dad proud. Chris is a tragic character who only starts to realize the depth of his pain at the end of the first season of his show. That's when he finally begins to change, so he won't turn into his dad.
Tragic.
I know that Chris is an adult, and he could have made different choices, since his dad no longer controls him, but we can empathize with him because of everything he went through. Deep down, we know that if we'd lived his life, we might have ended up even worse than Peacemaker. That doesn't mean we excuse his actions or cheer when he kills Rick Flag, but we can feel bad for him while still recognizing that he's not a good person. Plus, his relationship with his dad makes him very human. Maybe your dad isn't a supervillain, and hopefully he didn't treat you like Augie treated Chris. But who doesn't want to make their dad proud? Nebula and Gamora have a similar journey in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. They were raised by Thanos, a genocidal maniac who made them compete to the point where they hated each other, and he forced them to kill innocent people to earn his affection. It's easier to connect with Gamora because of her relationship with Star-Lord, but we also empathize with Nebula, who was tortured by her dad for decades. Take away the superpowers and space travel, and Nebula is a textbook example of a toxic relationship, where the victim does everything to please someone who treats them horribly, because they don't know what a healthy relationship looks like. Nebula only starts to heal at the end of Guardians 2, when she spares Gamora's life, and then the two share a hug. Even though Nebula tried to kill the Guardians in the first 2 movies and treated them terribly many times, we can't help but feel bad for her, because her behavior is her dad's fault, just like Peacemaker.
That is so sad!
Step 2 to caring about these characters is to show their vulnerable side. James Gunn loves creating tough, foul-mouthed characters who pretend not to care about anyone. On paper, we're supposed to hate them because they treat everyone like dirt, but they win us over by letting their guard down every now and then. Take Rocket, for example. In Guardians 1, he's a total jerk 95% of the time, constantly putting down everyone except Groot. But halfway through the movie, he gets drunk and admits that he hates himself because he didn't ask to be torn apart and turned into a monster. Later, he sheds a tear when he thinks Groot is about to die. And at the end of the film, he lets Drax pet him for comfort. Those 3 moments are enough to show us that Rocket isn't just a killing machine. He might not know how to express himself properly, but he has very human feelings.
Aww.
The same thing happens with Frankenstein's bride in Creature Commandos. She spends most of the series as a tough, cynical character who refuses to rely on anyone and acts like she doesn't care about anything. Sure, she saves a sex worker in episode 6, but she brushes it off like it's no big deal because she refuses to let her guard down. She even tells Nina, the fish girl who's been with her all season, that she doesn't care what happens to her because they're not friends. But at the end of the final episode, she breaks down crying when Nina dies because she lost the only person she could have considered a friend. That brief moment of crying is all we need to see that the bride is just as human as we are. She just doesn't feel comfortable showing it, like Rocket. Even Dr. Phosphorus has his moments of vulnerability. And no, I'm not talking about the flashback to his origin story. In the final episode, he says he's mad at Weasel for hurting his arm, but what really upsets him is how the castle guards keep petting him. The bride jokes, asking if he'd rather they pat him on the back like a dog, and surprisingly, Surprisingly, Phosphorus admits he would. He's desperate for any kind of human contact. Because of his powers, no one can touch him without getting burned, literally. It's a fleeting moment, but it humanizes the guy. Phosphorus isn't just angry because a mobster killed his wife and ruined his life. He's also angry because he can't get a simple hug or even a handshake without hurting someone. If these moments of vulnerability happen too often, we might accuse Gunn of trying to manipulate us. But because they're so rare, we can empathize with these characters without losing respect for them. Step 3 is to make them the heroes of their own story. For this to work, these guys need to face villains who are way worse than they are. They have to be truly evil people with no chance of redemption who we can't possibly empathize with. This makes it easier for us to root for the protagonists, even if they're morally flexible. The best example is the High Evolutionary, the main villain in Guardians 3. This guy is a total jerk from start to finish. He's a genius, but he uses his brilliance to experiment on animals and turn them into living weapons. It's heartbreaking to see him trick Rocket into thinking he'll have a happy life someday, when his plan all along was to sacrifice him for his research. And he's even more disgusting when he gets jealous of Rocket for being smarter than him. As if that weren't enough, the High Evolutionary kills all of Rocket's friends, while Rocket is powerless to stop him. And in the third act, he has the audacity to say he's superior to God.
Narcissistic attention seeker.
We're just waiting for the Guardians to kick his butt during the whole movie. He's so awful that even his own employees turn against him in the end. There's no justification for his crimes, and unlike Peacemaker, we can't even understand why he does what he does. Gunn doesn't want us to empathize with the High Evolutionary. He wants us to enjoy watching the Guardians take him down. And because we hate him so much, we don't care that the Guardians leave him to die instead of taking him prisoner. The same thing happens with Ego in Guardians 2. He seems friendly at first, but then casually admits to killing Quill's mom in the most heartless way possible. And don't even get me started on White Dragon. I can't even describe the things he does here without risking the video getting taken down. These villains are so evil that they make the protagonists look like they share the values of Superman or Captain America. Even if Quill, Chris, and the others don't hesitate to kill their enemies. I still remember this line from Quill in Guardians 3.
Now kill them all. Kill them all. Kill them all.
But we still root for them because their enemies are unforgivable. And that brings us to step 4. Make these guys care about someone other than themselves. This is the most important step. Gunn's characters might be selfish and rude, but by the end of the day, they care about someone else, whether they admit it or not. Take Star-Lord in Guardians 1. He starts out as this selfish guy who abandons his mom on her deathbed and grows up to be a bounty hunter, willing to do anything for money. He lies, cheats, and scams everyone for a quick couple of credits. But then he meets Gamora and instantly falls for her. He saves her twice, once from being killed by Drax, and again from freezing to death in space. Peter even gives her his helmet so she can breathe, risking his own life. If the Ravagers had shown up 5 seconds later, Peter would have died in space just to protect a girl he'd only known for a few hours. At first, it seems like Quill doesn't really care about Gamora. Maybe he just wants to bone! Or use her connections as Thanos' daughter to make a profit. But as Mantis points out in Guardians 2, Peter has genuine romantic and sexual feelings for Gamora. He struggles to express them out loud, but from the moment he meets her, he genuinely cares about her. Peter might be a womanizer, a liar, and a troublemaker, but his willingness to risk his life for Gamora makes us root for him. It shows that he's not just a goofy con man, he's a broken guy who lost his mom and was abandoned by his dad, trying to be a better person and have a meaningful relationship. Even though he's made bad decisions, we want to believe in Quill and forgive him, like when he ruins Iron Man's plan on Titan, because we all hope that broken people can change and find redemption. Yondu is another great example. He starts out as a Ravager who exploits everyone around him, seemingly caring about no one. At times, he even comes across as more treacherous than Quill. But as the story unfolds, we learn that Yondu raised Peter as the son he never had. He didn't do the best job, but he genuinely cares about him. Yondu just acts tough and treats Peter harshly in front of others, so no one thinks he's gone soft. Like most of Gunn's characters, he has trouble expressing his feelings, but when it comes down to it, he chooses to save Peter, sacrificing himself in the process. That moment in Guardians 2 is heartbreaking, because we realize that Yondu truly cared about Quill. He might not have sacrificed himself for anyone else, but his love for Peter makes us empathize with him. This is one of James Gunn's storytelling strengths. His characters might be rude and selfish sometimes, but at the end of the day, they build meaningful connections with each other. The Guardians come from broken homes, or have lost their loved ones, but they find a new family willing to risk everything for them. Maybe they're not a perfect family, but they're the family they needed. The Creature Commandos were treated as monsters by society, and most of them lost all their meaningful connections, but they found a family in each other. Even the Suicide Squad members grew close and helped each other out. Well, except for Peacemaker. James Gunn makes us care about these characters because they're well written. Their stories are compelling and they're deeply human. It doesn't matter what they look like or if the world sees them as monsters. We can see ourselves in them. If Gunn keeps creating characters like this in his his upcoming DC projects, he might just outdo Marvel. After all, characters are the key to making people fall in love with these stories. By sticking to this 4 steps, Gunn may knock it out of the park in 2025 and surpass Marvel. We explain if that's possible in this video over here.
I don't buy it.